This podcast is produced by the Center for Deployment Psychology at the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. In addition, references to any specific companies, products, processes, or services does not necessarily constitute or imply endorsement by the Uniformed Services University, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. Welcome to CDP's podcast, Practical for Your Practice,
where we give you actionable intel to support what you do.
One colleague to another.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Practical for Your Practice. I'm Dr. Kevin Holloway, one of our hosts. I'm joined, of course, by Dr. Jenna Ermold. Hi, Jenna. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast.
How are you doing?
I'm really good today. Thanks, Kevin.
Good.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
I'm excited.
I always love talking to Jenna because we align in lots of ways that we think about things and, kind of approach things. And that's, I don't know, kind of a really weak segue into our topic. But there it is. So we're also joined today by our fabulous guest, Dr. Abigail Angkaw. She's joining us. Well, Abby, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and welcome.
Thank you. And it's so nice to see you both again. It's been a while.
It has.
Too long.
And I am excited to be here. I'm thinking about our relationship and where we met. And it was through one of my current roles. I have a few roles. One of my current roles as a consultant with the National Center for PTSD in their PTSD Consultation Program. And we were doing a few trainings together. And I'm still in that role as a consultant. I also have a few other roles with the VA San Diego. I'm a deputy associate chief of staff overseeing the outpatient clinics here. I'm also with the University of San Diego, or University of California, San Diego, in their School of Medicine. And I'm here representing myself and not those entities. And it's really great to be here and to be chatting with you both again.
Well, and given all those roles, we're really happy you could carve out some time to come talk to us, because you are one busy woman, that's for sure.
So for those of you who don't know, we got to know Abby through a different cooperative program between the Center for Deployment Psychology and National Center for PTSD, where we're cooperating together and providing some training for civilian providers who will likely be seeing veterans in their practice. So a little bit of work in military culture, doing some work in PTSD assessment, and then also in suicide risk assessment and prevention. So it's in many ways, kind of the topics we're all passionate about. But then, of course, too, Abby's not limited to only those topics. She has fabulous expertise other places too. And we had Abby on as one of the guests for our monthly webinar a couple of years ago, talking about, really about the relationship between therapists and clients within the context of, this was about the time that the global pandemic was really just starting to be causing difficulties in many different ways, interrupting lives, and then certainly a lot of people seeking mental health care. So, Jenna was the host for that webinar, I believe. So.
Yeah, it was. And I'm trying to remember the exact title, but it's something like The Elephant in the Room or Sociocultural. Right. So what was the actual title, Abby? Do you remember?
I imagine it is The Elephant in the Room. And the focus was on how do we treat PTSD when clinicians are having strong reactions to what their patients or clients are bringing up about sociocultural issues. And it's not a brand new thing. This has always happened, but especially since the pandemic, related and not related to the pandemic, this has been an issue that's really just kind of come to light a lot more. And what I was seeing as a consultant, people asking questions about.
Well, and that's the thing. It's certainly, the pandemic is stressful and disruptive in and of itself, but there are so many other things going on at the same time too. A lot of, upheaval in, politics and in, people's personal politics, and a lot of divisiveness in politics, and, certainly some culture wars, if we want to call them that, at least here in the US. And, certainly a lot of things going on at once that people have very strong feelings about, and they don't always align those strong feelings between therapist and client. So what's changed? What's gotten better since then, or what's gotten worse?
The pandemic started about 3 years ago now in 2020. I can recall we started getting consultation questions, and it also aligned with the big election. So election was happening. And I don't know about you both, but when I was trained as a psychologist, there's always a question of how much do you disclose about yourself? How much should we be kind of blank slates, or, and letting others share information. But especially with the election, I think we were hearing a lot of folks kind of unsure what to do. We're all people, and it'd be one thing if it was just the pandemic, but between that 2020 and now we're in 2023, not a lot has really let up. There's still a pandemic, the kind of, if we think sociocultural or sociopolitical in this really vague sense, racial injustice, the changes that's in laws with the Supreme Court, changing, who's in charge of the country, just the things that hit the news. And we're in a different place now, I think, with people's exposure to news and media. It's just so forefront now. So it shouldn't be a surprise if you were a therapist or any sort of mental health clinician, and that is in the front of your patient's mind. I want to talk to you about what I just read or what's bothering me. We should
this argument I had with family, or
totally. Oh yes, we should expect people to be bringing up sociocultural, sociopolitical issues. But I don't think that's something that we as mental health clinicians talk through a lot. And to what extent do we bring up our own beliefs? And I think it's hard, even when we were starting to put together that presentation, which I did with Brittany Hall Clark, who's another consultant. She and I work closely together. There was a lot of, we want to be pretty watchful that we weren't imposing our own beliefs and values when we were talking about it either. We don't want to be directional about what do you do if your client is really liberal and you're conservative. That's not what we're thinking here, but just how do you address it when it comes in the room? I think the question was change. I don't think there's been a bunch of change. I think both in terms of talking about diversity, but I think when we first conceptualized this, it was actually about burnout. There was a lot of thoughts.
That was going to be my next question.
And I think when we think of just these overlapping issues and kind of the length of the pandemic, that doesn't seem like it will end. This is it's really a shift in our reality now. That burnout is still a real thing, a lot of switching jobs. And I think we see that play out in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Which can really set up some tough, when you've got these really difficult, easily triggering the areas that clients might bring in, and you've got providers who are exhausted and overworked. It could really sort of set up some challenges and potential disaster areas. So we've seen that some in our consultation too, just the lengths that providers are going to make this work for clients who are, and a lot via telehealth, but, having to be creative, having to, really shift gears in how you provide care. And then what happens when the person you're providing care to, you're really struggling to figure out how to make this therapeutic relationship therapeutic when things are kind of blowing up. And it's funny, I feel like this was the first year. There was sort of the past couple of years around New Year's, you would sort of see this desire, like, this is the year, like 2020, looking forward to 2021, looking forward to 2022, like this was all going to end, like somehow that year would be over and now we'd move on. And I didn't see any of that in 2023. Right. It's just sort of like this new normal or the new reality, as you said. So that's kind of interesting. We've just sort of accepted at this point, we're going to continue to, navigate kind of the dumpster fire that's going on perpetually. And
how do we readjust? Even right before we all met, I got a text from my kid's school that there's he's been exposed, that one of those contact tracing texts, and so the things have just shifted, and so our therapists, our mental health clinicians are people too, and absolutely, we are trying to do the work. I appreciate, Jenna, that you brought up how much the way that we practice changed. feels like so long ago, but it was almost immediate that all of a sudden everything had to shift to virtual. And I don't know about your all settings, but we're still mostly virtual in our setting for a lot of good reasons. It does break down a lot of barriers, but that has been something that added on for sure.
Well, I think too, I certainly have colleagues who, experience what you're describing there. We were pretty much doing face-to-face work in an office that, they come to a clinic or a professional office, and a lot of that changed over. And that too, it was a tough shift for everybody, but that too, in and of itself could be the context for some of these clashes of very strong opinions and beliefs. So, for example, clients demanding why they couldn't come to an office, or why they had to wear a mask when they came to an office, or, why do I even have to do telehealth? Or for, on the other side of that, why isn't everybody here wearing a mask? This imperils me. And just, some of the very strong. And I think, I'm not going to say one side is right or wrong or whatever, but gosh, we all, like you said, we're people. We have our own beliefs too, right? We have these other things, these very strong things that are important to us. And so it can be tough to have a belief that this is the right thing to do. This is the right way to go. And can I connect with somebody who is diametrically opposed to some of that?
And can I do the treatment that I was hoping to do, when this is what's in the room? Like, they want to talk about policies and what I saw on the news, but our plan was to do prolonged exposure.
Right.
It's just avoidance. We can just chalk that up to avoidance.
that is the way. Conceptualize it.
When in doubt. So, I think, what do you do? Well, I think that's something that we've had some of the clinicians that come to our consultation, when that derails, or that kind of, when your intention is to do an evidence-based, treatment, and you're kind of, we can use PE because we're all PE therapists, and you're moving forward with that, but these things pop up. And let's not forget, like, natural disasters. It was everything. It was every category. We checked every box. Maybe what did you see, and what was some of your advice to clinicians when some of these sociocultural pieces came up and maybe were a little bit disruptive, or could potentially be disruptive, or maybe they really needed to be acknowledged and dealt with, and the other part of treatment kind of paused because it really was more like the forefront of the presenting problem. I guess any thoughts there, or stories or advice that you've seen in the consultation program at NCPTSD?
No, I think that's a great question, because I think at the foundation and the way that we'd framed it when Brittany and I were really thinking about the presentation was not just people bringing up what happens day to day, but the clinician having a strong reaction. Yeah. And that clinician having a strong reaction is the elephant in the room. Like it is, it's that clinician, psychiatrist, social worker, psychologist trying to do what they were hoping to do, whether it's an assessment or PE. Let's start your first imaginal. And then someone says that your client says something that either that all of a sudden, because we are people and are in this, it's an interesting thing. It's a shared stressful time. It's not unique to one person. So it's really shifted everything. I think that first part is really acknowledging as an individual that strong reaction that somebody is having. Whether, are you angry? Are you angry because they've used a racial slur? Are you angry because you just disagree with what your clients saying that they voted for someone, and you have very strong feelings and you don't agree, and you find yourself having an urge to say something, but it would be off topic essentially. Or, sometimes those strong reactions can be phrased because your clients asked you a question. They might just ask you, do you agree with the masking? Do you agree with who did you vote for? Or something like that. Yes. And I think those were the questions that we were getting. What do you do? And there isn't, I think, Jenna, there's a lot of considerations there that you would make. A lot of it depends on the reaction that you're having. If your reaction is so strong that that it's impacting your empathy and your ability to align and do the care that you need to do, it's meaningful to pause, probably to seek consultation, because our primary goal is to care for somebody, is to be providing treatment to that person.
Absolutely.
There is kind of, it is an ethical question of how much do you disclose. I mentioned that some people are really trained not to at all, and some people are trained that you do disclose. There are different sorts of orientations for doing therapy, especially where disclosure is part of it. And if you don't disclose that you disagree, especially if you find that someone has said something oppressive, like about race, then it could be interpreted as colluding and agreeing with it.
Right.
So I think this was not a client, but I've been in a work situation. One of my jobs is as kind of an administrator and leader, but especially when all the new kind of COVID guidance came down in the screening, there was a situation where somebody said, "I don't need to go through COVID screening. I'm not Chinese," and that. Folks can't see me, but I'm Asian. I certainly had a strong reaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's, kind of thinking, at what point do you disclose that I disagree, that hurt my feelings, that isn't appropriate? Or do you go straight to, that's not allowed, let's focus on this, or I won't.
Or do you educate? Like, I think I would just be so drawn to want to educate.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You could educate, and I think that is actually part when we think of kind of some folks are familiar with Sue. So Sue did a lot of literature, especially on addressing microaggressions. Mm-hmm. And some of it was providing education. That can be a step that's taken. But I think that immediate reaction is thinking, can I do the work that I need to do? And how do I do that? Do I make a disclosure? Some of the things that we really recommend are trying to find that empathy. That is really part of being mental health clinicians. And there are lots of good ways to do that when we're treating PTSD. So the kind of doing really good case conceptualizations, understanding maybe that came from somewhere. Intention does matter. Were they trying to make a joke? Were they trying to kind of break down kind of the tension? Are they nervous? Are they avoiding? Like, it's a favorite to go to with PTSD. But I think those sort of considerations are important. I think at the far end, it would be, and it is a consideration depending on where you work. Would they be better served working with somebody else because of, and I don't think that's a place that you should jump to. But if you're in a setting where there are other people that they could work with, and you're really finding yourself having difficulty being the sort of clinician that you should be, I think that's something to consider. And I think overlying that consulting, yes. Talking to colleagues, asking for help and advice, trying to understand what's happening, and using the skills that we teach other people to do.
I love all that, because it reminds me that, good therapy is often a lot of being able to step into your client's world and, recognizing what things mean to them, kind of seeing it from their perspective, and which doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to adopt their worldview, but kind of, being there with them, recognizing that some of that may be symptom driven. Some of it may be really kind of based on experiences, real legitimate experiences that they've had that are different than our own. But then also too, just even thinking about, the therapeutic relationship is so important. If that therapeutic relationship is damaged and if it's really so, I guess, intense that moving forward isn't going to be helpful to the client, that's another place where sometimes we have to kind of swallow our pride a little bit and think about, what is best for this person, not can I be right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the context and what we're working on, it's different, I think, if you're in a long-term kind of, you're doing PE for 8 to 12 sessions, you have an ongoing relationship with someone versus maybe a one-time screen, and the focus is to help screen them and point them in the right direction. I think you might, or maybe you're assessing for suicide and this comes up. I think the priority there would be to probably keep assessing for safety, but, kind of consider the context that we're working into.
Absolutely.
I was thinking too, it's really, it's a indicative of how they interact with the rest of the world too, right? Like, so, when we're in therapy with somebody, we're seeing snapshots of how they might interact with others and problems that might come up for them, given their style or how they choose to interact. And I think maybe not letting go of that either, not that you're trying to change their mind or sway their views, but how the behavior that they exhibited in your room together, in your session together, impacted the other person, and have they thought about that in some of their other relationships? I mean, like, there's so much therapeutic fodder there too. But I think the hard part is we're the other human with them that was affected by it. So, and this happens obviously, and I'm a behaviorist, and I feel like we're talking about countertransference right now. But there's stuff there that I think we can be helpful in just sort of communication and interpersonal relationships, and how our views, how we express our views might impact other people. Is stuff to talk about. And, and I think, like, in one of your slides, you definitely highlighted the personal is political, right? Like, so it's not if this comes up, this will come up, and what do you do with it, and how do you prepare yourself? So I love some of the ideas that you've talked about so far.
Thank you. No, I think that is great. It's hard to kind of balance priorities. I think sometimes when you're in, a lot of what folks are doing is really deciding on the fly, what is my focus of treating this person right now? And I think one recommendation we would make is really coming down to having a strong conceptualization of this client, service member, veteran that you're working with. So Jenny, you mentioned, like, thinking of those, this is how they interact with the world. And if we're thinking of somebody with PTSD, where we would expect there to be shifts in thoughts after a trauma about safety, about power and control, which would be directly related to a lot of the socio-political, cultural things with changes in policies.
Absolutely.
And threats because of natural disasters and things like that. That I think, to the extent that we can understand or try to understand, this as a kind of as a behavior or, an action, if you're using an ABC sheet, the A, like this statement was made, but maybe what came before that, maybe what is around that, and how might it be related to, if you're doing CPT stuck points, so how might it be related to some of those core beliefs about safety, trust, power, control, that might have shifted from trauma that you might be planning to work on in treatment. And so if you can pull those together, I think that often helps with finding, keeping your empathy there, so that you can help try best to which empathy is really understanding, trying to understand where they're coming from. And I do think that helps a lot, and, helps keep moving forward in PTSD treatment rather than stalling it, or kind of spending a session talking about politics instead of PTSD, or just, can we put it together, because it should come together.
It feels like a very fine balance sometimes too, right? Because on the one hand, we don't want to be projecting our opinions, our beliefs onto our client. We don't want to be trying to change them to think like us. But at the same time, the point of therapy very often, a good outcome is that they think about things, the world, themselves, safety, power, all things differently than when we started. And I guess that's that place where it is kind of this fine balancing act between, making sure that we're not projecting our beliefs onto them, and that's what we're interpreting as health, is that they agree, but more of helping them to find a different way of understanding those things that is workable for them, that's functional for them, and it can still be different than ours.
Yeah.
I would like to foot stomp if you were not able to catch the webinar, because it really, so many wonderful, you did a great case example that was fabulous with Mr. Arnold, I think his name was. But if you have, we're going to put the link in the show notes, but I would definitely encourage any of you who are interested to circle back and take a listen and a look at that presentation that was, I think, January 2021. It was a while ago. but there's some really specific things that you can do with your case conceptualization and make sure you're focusing on also, kind of when to proceed and when to maybe refer out, kind of really thinking, helping folks to think that through. So I'm just going to put a shout out to be able to circle back and take a listen to that as well.
Yeah, great. So Jenna, who did you vote for? I'm kidding.
So let's talk about action.
Totally kidding.
As you said earlier in the podcast, we tend to align, Kevin. So I think you can probably figure that out. But maybe this is a good time, Abby. At the end of every show, we try to leave our listeners with what we call actionable intel. Like, what can I've listened to this and I'm thinking about this and I want to sort of take something forward into my practice that I do or think about. If you had some actionable intel to share with our listeners on resources or things to be thinking about, if this, if the elephant is in their room, if you will, what would those be?
No, I think probably the first would be, given where I mentioned burnout in terms of this, we were talking about burnout in 2020 and burnout is still here in kind of 2023. And there is some literature to suggest that mental health clinicians who work in the fields of trauma might be particularly susceptible. So I think my first suggestion would be a bit of self-reflection to really pause and consider, how have things shifted for you since 2020? When did you completely have to change the way that you do your practice? How have you noticed sociocultural issues and political issues come into your treatment settings? Have you noticed? How have you been addressing them, if you have been? And are there elephants in your room? Like, have they been there? And I think that's probably the best place to start, is just to see if it is to kind of raise some insight and awareness. So that'd probably be my first suggestion. Second suggestion would be, I mentioned a lot the importance of assessment and case conceptualization. Kevin, I appreciate you bringing up the training that we had done together, and that's still ongoing between the National Center and Center for Deployment Psychology. Focuses on assessment, and I think focusing on understanding and having a good conceptualization for, and Jenna, I remember you presenting on military culture, thinking culturally when we are not just about diagnosis and symptoms, but really trying to think holistically about the clients and patients that we're treating. So what are their identity characteristics that might be coming into the room and contributing to mental health? How are things going at home in their housing situation and things like that? And how are they feeling about politics and sociocultural issues? That is part of their conceptualization in addition to PTSD. And then the last thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't say actionable, is to consult. I think we are not alone. And so it's so nice to be here and in meeting with you both again. But I think using the strength and the colleagues that we have, and the reaching out within our institutions, outside of our institutions, with experts, and there's a lot of value. It can help save you time, when things are hard, but also it's nice, I think, to reflect back.
I had a mentor that would say, spread the liability around. And
exactly.
It's a crass way of saying it, but
it's true. Don't make those decisions on your own.
Absolutely. Get input.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first we have to notice the elephant, and then we have some ways to maybe cage the elephant.
I like that.
Or dress it, yeah.
Caging the elephant be there. With Abby. That'll be the title. And of course, we'll definitely link to the NCPTSD and the National Center for PTSD. If you've not been to their website, boy, are you missing out, because there are so many resources for providers. Some of our favorite, most colleagues, for sure. So we'll definitely link to that. And then and APA also has some good guidelines, multicultural guidelines, and I think resources that we could probably link to too. But we are so glad that you were able to visit with us today.
Thank you so much.
Join us. You're a frequent flyer, Abby. We just can't quit you. We want you for webinars, and we want you for podcasts. And hopefully this is just we'll see you again in some context. But
absolutely, I'm looking forward to our paths crossing again.
For sure.
Thanks. Well, thank you everybody also for tuning in. Come back next time for our next episode of Practical for Your Practice. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Practical for Your Practice.
Please feel free to subscribe, rate, and join in on the conversation in the comments.
Until next time.